I'm going to hit record, and we're recording. Everybody, this is SIG Architecture for Thursday, January 17th, 2019. I am one of your co-leads, Jay Singer-Dumars, and we're going to go ahead and pull up the agenda, which is at bit.ly/sig-architecture. And we'll go ahead and get right into it. And the first item belongs to Matt Farina, are you here, Matt?
I am. I just joined. Hello.
Cool. So, you're up first on the agenda, and I may drop because my internet is so bad today.
And if you drop, I will continue to carry this on for you.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Jace, while I'm talking, can you actually make me the co-host so the recording and everything continues if you happen to drop?
I will do that.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing, last week, we were actually talking about who owns what and what's going on, and we had the big Windows KEP thing a while ago where SIG Architecture had a lot of opinions. And right now they're looking at their KEPs and the things that are going to go into them. And so my question was, who or if SIG Architecture should have some approval loop in that, so that way they know that we agreed and signed off to it, so it never comes back to them and says, oh, this other thing happened because it wasn't known. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that either SIG Architecture agrees we don't need to be in the loop on it, or we have names to put on it to make sure it's in the cycle and everything's tied off on for their benefit. And so that's kind of where I was going with it. I don't know. I'm guessing Brian's not on. Oh, Brian, you are on. And I didn't know, since you had so many opinions before, I was actually going to seed it maybe with you being the person. I just wanted to make sure that we did this.
Yeah, maybe you can put my name on that. And GitHub, I'll just remind people, GitHub notifications are basically worthless. I have to do archaeology to find out what I was mentioned on. So I'm stumbling on things that I was mentioned in September and October right now. So please ping me via other means like Slack or something, and at least that way it's easier for me to find them. I can't generally respond synchronously, but I will get to it asynchronously. So I did see that the Windows KEP already merged, but I have it open and plan to take a look at it.
So it merged, it merged in a provisional state just to keep things moving, and now they're looking to fill out additional features. The goal is to have it implementable by the end of the month when the feature freeze needs to be done. So it would be signing off on the additional pull requests going in. One of them for testing is in the, at least that's where it was the other day.
It's in review. I'm going to update that. So.
Yeah. Sorry, KEP for testing, or just the long-standing testing PR about getting the tests running in automation?
This is just against the Windows stuff. They merged it provisional to merge fast, and then as they're adding new things, they're individual pull requests talking about those. And so on those is where we would look for an approver from here for each of those slices as a pull request.
Okay. Well, I'll start by taking a look at what's there. It's at the top of my SIG architecture list, which I have been assembling this week. Like I said, I was doing archaeology. There are a number of API reviews. We need to make sure folks get looked on. There are a couple of conformance things. I can see Aaron is on. Didn't escalate any of those to me, so I don't know if any are ready yet. I saw Clayton also responding to some of the conformance test PRs. But yeah, the top of my personal list, SIG architecture-wise, is definitely Windows. I don't want them to get blocked just because they didn't get bandwidth, so I agree with that. We probably, I know they're engaged heavily with SIG testing, and there was a PR outstanding to SIG docs, but we should probably double check to make sure, or to surface whether there are other SIGs they need to engage with early.
I feel like SIG Node is the other one that had opinions late in the day last time around.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Who was that? Who had
SIG Node? Something about SIG Node?
Yeah, I think we should make sure SIG Node is also one of those people because they had concerns late in the day. Can you hear me okay now?
There's a lot of background noise.
Yeah, sorry, I needed my breakfast.
Yeah, I definitely pinged SIG Node last time, and it seems like along with SIG testing, they're one of the more engaged SIGs already. I don't know, do you feel like you have any standing issues with them, Patrick?
Yeah, so I'll double check the reviewer list. Today, I think SIG architecture and SIG node were listed just by alias. And so I'll make sure that you get on there as a specific name for as a reviewer from SIG architecture, and I'll get a specific name from SIG node. It's probably going to be Yuju or Dawn would be my guess.
That would be my guess too.
And Aaron had his hand up. Is that the question you just dropped in chat?
No, it was sort of the other one. I mean, I wanted to talk specifics about your test plan just to sanity check how this plays out tactically. But before I get to that question, words mean specific things in different contexts here. Are we talking about approvers or reviewers? Because I feel like Matt's question was, who should be the approvers for the Windows KEP?
Yeah, and this actually gets into it because there's merging the pull requests, and then of course there's an approver on it as now being marked as implementable. And if you look at a KEP, there's approvers and reviewers on this, and who should be in that approver loop and reviewer loop. And so, for example, I think SIG node should definitely be on the folks there, the chairs or technical leads, I don't remember what they have, should be in the reviewers loop for testing, and node should be on there for the KEP and then pulled into each of the pull request changes. And SIG architecture should definitely be in the reviewers loop, but there is that approver line as well. That is, these are the people that we need sign off from to actually make it so, right? They're the throats to choke. They're the people who can say yes or no. And last time SIG architecture made a very big no. And so I want to know, should somebody's name, and I'm not worried, maybe we choose the chairs from SIG architecture, or we hand select and delegate to certain people who are willing to own and make sure they're available, just to make sure if SIG architecture wants a say in approving or denying or having anything to do with it next time, that they're there, or we just say, no, we're good for that approvers line, and we say maybe it's just the chairs of SIG Windows need to be the approvers. But I want to make sure that we are in agreement up front on what this should be in SIG architecture's role.
Just another bit of context here. So since words have meanings, I'm taking a look at this KEP proposal on here, KEP document, I think is the closest thing we have to a document on like the way KEPs work today. Someone please stop me if there's something more recent. And so I'm looking at what reviewers and approvers are in this context and trying to understand what additional powers are granted to an approver here. I feel like Matt's asking from the perspective of we appear to be acting as if approvers are somebody who can say no and block progress. There's something in here about the approvers get to say about whether a KEP moves to approved, which I don't think we've even used anymore. I think it's like implementable to what exactly?
Yeah, implementable is about the equivalent to the approved state. In fact, in implementable, it says the approvers have approved this KEP for implementation is what the implementable. We got a little funny with the names, but there is still a correlation there.
I mean, to take them sort of meta, I think what Matt is really saying is, who are the people who are going to potentially move the goalposts again? And can we get some commitments around the idea that last minute people aren't going to jump in and move goalposts?
Well, I don't think goalposts move. As far as I can tell, the goalposts to people were not clear before, right? So I don't think it's fair to characterize it that way. Like the release team raised significant concerns that there wasn't clear test signal, and I think that was a reasonable concern. So I don't think any single person can say, yeah, this will go forward no matter what. Really, we need program management on the effort to make sure that everybody's expectations are met, right?
No, that's fair. No, that's fair that things can happen. I guess what is really being said is like, let's nominate one person from each relevant area who they're comfortable delegating the decision to, with the understanding that, you know, things absolutely can change, but that they have a 90% confidence that, you know.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable approach, Brendan, to make sure that, you know, we talk in advance to the release team. Like if we were releasing a feature inside of Google, we would talk to the release team, we would talk to SRE, you know, we would make sure that it was actually ready to be launched, right? So I think that is effectively what we have to do now. They have been very engaged with SIG node and SIG testing. We also need to make sure that SIG release understands what's going on so we can find out earlier if there are concerns.
And I guess effectively what I think what Matt is asking for is like, imagine that you approves. We kind of want a commitment that means that Dawn is going to defer to her judgment, right? Unless it's like really extreme.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, we're doing bad at the moderation thing. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is we want unanimous consent from the set of approvers, and probably the best thing to do would be to have the approvers hammer out what the graduation criteria are for this KEP. If I call goalposts graduation criteria, I would expect the approvers are in charge of unanimously agreeing that they have the right checklist for graduation criteria. And if any one of them says no, then we have to hash it out somehow. And I'm going to hand over to Matt because I interrupted.
I had his hand up next.
Yeah, Craig's up next.
Yes,
after Matt.
So yeah, in fact, I pasted a link in. There are fields for approvers and reviewers, and approvers according to the, because, we've been going through this, so we really on this one should dot the I's and cross the T's. The approvers are the individuals that make the call to move this KEP to approved, which in our current flow actually means implementable, which is what they need by the end of the month. There are currently no names there now, and this is actually a distinct thing from the authors. It's the people other than the authors who can give it the thumbs up, thumbs down, make that happen. For Windows, we need to actually make sure we get the right people in there. And my original question was, should that be somebody from SIG architecture or not? But I want to make sure that they have the right people on there who can give it the thumbs up, the thumbs down, and make sure they have the bandwidth along the way to review and have those conversations if they need to happen, so that Windows has those right people. And so we really need a set of names to put here.
It looks like Michael has his hand up.
Craig is waiting.
Yeah, Craig.
I was just going to nominate myself to draft the list of graduation criteria for this particular KEP and work with all of the reviewers and approvers to iterate on that to make sure it's got the right list of things.
Yeah, I think that's great. Starting at the high level, users need to be able to understand what the feature is and what it does and how to use it. And that was one of the things we wanted to accomplish with the KEP, is that usually at the design doc stage is where it's described kind of the detail level of what something does. And obviously there will need to be user docs about how to use it as well. And then the release team needs clear test signal, right? So that's why we've been working on getting stable publicly reported test results. For GA, the GA bar specifically, we need to be confident that we're not going to have to break backward compatibility, right? And that it's not going to break their cluster, for example. So at the high level, that's kind of what the bar needs to be. We do have stated criteria for API GA, and you can kind of take inspiration from that. It's in the API changes document. I can dig that up and paste it into the chat. But that's the starting point, is I would just think about what would the expectations of these different stakeholders be, and how, for this specific thing, are we going to meet those expectations?
Yeah, thank you for that guidance.
Michael, you're on mute.
Michael.
We still can't hear you. Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks, Dims, for posting the link.
So, yeah, I'm fine saying something. Like, I don't want to get too hung up on the technicality of words. I'm actually trying to see the discussion further. Like, I don't think we actually know what these things are. So I'm trying to hash out what we believe these set of people should be. It sounds like a representative from a SIG. That could change if the SIG decides they need somebody else instead of that person. So we're figuring out the set of SIGs, the people from those SIGs, and we'll move forward.
Yeah, and I think we found the SIGs already, right? So
the SIG, can somebody rattle off the list of SIGs or write it in the meeting notes or something?
Yeah, I lost track of the meeting notes doc.
So I think. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to repeat back what we had so far.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool, excellent. So we for the SIGs, it was SIG node, SIG docs, SIG architecture, SIG release. Those were the 4 SIGs that are really impacted on Windows, and we need to get either approval or reviewer status from each of them. So Craig and me and Patrick can work with both identifying an individual from each of those SIGs that will give the go no go decision and kind of agree on the graduation criteria. And where they're approver, they have a much higher say into the process versus the reviewer status. So we'll work on that and get back to you guys. And I wanted to add one more thing. So Brian, as you're gonna go and review the CAP from the early discussion at the beginning of the meeting, one of the things I wanted to talk about is if you have any questions, rather than just trying to hash them all out in threads on GitHub, it'd be useful just send a quick message on Slack to either me or Craig or Patrick, and we can set up a quick 15-minute meeting and we can talk about those things with you. I think we can iterate a lot faster that way and get us to a point where we can have some form of agreement on whether process or any of your concerns.
Yeah, I agree with the point about not just doing it through GitHub, because that can be very challenging to stay on top of. Yeah, so I'll reach out to you through some of the means. What's your... I can look you up on Slack. Never mind.
I'll send you a message later on Slack. That way you have me. I'll start a thread between you, me, Patrick, and Craig. So you'll have us there.
Although it is important for the audit of the enhancement tracking that there is some record of what y'all talk about. I would suggest that you do make use of mailing list topics and make sure those links are added back into the next metadata.
Yeah, we won't do it in the dark. Or whatever we discuss, we'll make sure that it gets recorded back.
Yeah. So to feed back into the conversation, Dim's asked to use the SIG Windows mailing list because that'll provide traceability. And I also want to add real quickly that one of the other SIG that was suggested here was SIG testing be in the loop as a reviewer. That actually pertains to the current one, although SIG testing has looked at it.
And SIG testing is definitely engaged in helping, and we just need to reconfirm that they have bandwidth, but they are active in trying to help. I don't think they have specific concerns. They're more just like there to help.
I need SIG testing to be more than me. So maybe now's the time for me to talk specifics about where SIG testing was looped in, to talk about the test plan.
Well, I know Ben was working on it previously.
Yeah, I can like end up deferring to him, but I just want to like use an example of this, or use this as an example. So the test plan that Patrick had done previously, I linked the PR way up top. It's called Starting Test Plan section of Windows KEP. It is number 685 in the enhancements repo. And what Patrick had initially put in there, I guess it's still in there, is the full list of each and every single test case. There was like some Google Doc that we have tossed around in this SIG before that lists out each and every individual test case. That's cool. That's too much information for me as a release team person. And SIG testing, I think we only care about the mechanics of how those tests are run more than we care about the list of individual tests. Who on this list would need to see, like, do we need to spell out tests to that level? Does SIG architecture need to review each and every test case? Does SIG node need to review each and every test case?
I think, you know, I have looked at the list before, and I am happy to take a look at the list again once we have the automated test results posted. I think the main question for SIG testing was how do we designate Windows-only tests by tagging the tests? And that's the main thing we need to make sure we have resolved. As far as the bar, I'm hoping we can use the KEP to drive, you know, is this a reasonable set of features for users? And, you know, the tests would ideally match the documentation about what we say works and doesn't work.
Great. So just like the mechanics of it. SIG testing looked at the test plan. Yeah, test plan seems reasonable. SIG release looked at all of that and said that's way too much information for us to consume as a checkbox. What we'd much rather have is just a dashboard that we can go look at to see if that dashboard is all green.
Yes, I
but
agree
then
with
that begs the question in the context of goalpost moving of like shuffling tests in and out of this dashboard. Who's in charge of making sure that that is okay?
And who?
I thought that was the role of SIG Windows, frankly. That the SIG is responsible for making sure that the feature or capability that they're introducing it meets the criteria for operations and usability.
So to walk through that, right? Potentially, we could all look at the list of tests that are in. Let's say get a dashboard up. You have a list of tests on that dashboard. We see what they're at today, and we collectively agree that's the right list. And then we go away. A couple weeks pass while some coding happens. We come back. The dashboard is green. Should we now see if that list of tests has changed from what it initially was, and who should have sign off on that? Because it could be that we've kicked some tests out because we realized, oh no, that functionality can't ever work. Or, oh, we're going to punt on that this release cycle. And that seems kind of tricky to me.
Well, so far in the project, we haven't had that level of scrutiny, as far as I know, about the current set of tests that is running. I mean, there are many eyes on the tests in the project. You know, certainly the release team is probably paying more attention than most, but I think we have to have some level of trust if we can communicate kind of high-level goals to all the SIGs about what the purpose of the tests are and what we're trying to accomplish. And, you know, if something material changes, they should let the relevant people know, and then we can decide as a group what to do about that. And in terms of the project deliberately delegates responsibility. I guess this is part of making the bar clear, which is on my list of things to get to after finishing documenting the scope of the project. But I kind of agree with Craig that really we need to try to make sure that SIG Windows understands what's expected and they're responsible.
As a member of SIG testing and as the release lead, I'm totally fine with that. A-okay. Like, that sounds great. I just want to be clear, since we were so hung up on goalpost moving and the finicky details of such and such, just to walk through that hypothetically. But trusting us to do the right thing sounds great. In the past, CI Signal can sometimes notice if something like a test is just being removed to bring a test dashboard from red to green, and we might ask like, hey, why is this happening? And if we know the list of SIGs that are involved in this particular thing by looking at the documented set of people in the KEP, we know who to go double check with. And we'll see how that works.
Just one very quick comment on the testing, because it's that specific issue has been a problem before, and without wanting to rattle. So one good way of addressing that is to actually disable tests with a reason why they're disabled, because in the past what has happened is, you know, if a test didn't pass for long enough, we just like deleted it. And so you end up with, you know, bad coverage and these kind of things. Whereas if you agree on a set of tests, and then in some cases you have to disable some of them because they don't work at the moment, but at least they're labeled as disabled for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, we generally tag tests if there are special conditions under which they work, like if they're flaky or they're slow, or they don't work in certain cases, or they only work if a certain feature is enabled. So I think that's a good general practice, unless the test is just totally broken and nobody seems to care. Hopefully we'll get better coverage analysis that will allow us to determine the value of individual tests, so we can make more informed decisions about which tests to try to rescue. Patrick?
Yeah, so just to clarify for Quentin, many of the tests that we've been running so far are conformance tests that we've been trying to adapt to work on both Windows and Linux. And there have been cases where that's not possible. And so we're not disabling tests in code. we're currently disabling them through an exclusion list. And so my expectation is that you will see some test cases that are red fall off the board and be replaced with equivalents that are tailored to Windows. And so, it's a really simple example. If you parse the output of ls-l to look at the user list, that is not going to work on Windows. And there's other cases like that as well. But that was why I had started with the verbose approach of listing all test cases, so that way that could be reviewed. If we're not going to pre-review those, I'm going to remove those out. But so if you have questions about what is removed from the dashboard in, say, 3 weeks from now, I'm happy to answer those. But I just want to set the expectation that there will likely be some that are removed, and there will definitely be more added. So just want to clarify that up front.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I was actually trying to address the more general problem, which is if somebody comes along and says, why the hell are you guys not running this test? That should be in. Instead of having to have an argument about it, they can just go to the list of all the tests and they can see why it's not running with a little description there, and problem solved. And if they disagree with that, they can then, raise a topic as to the fact that this maybe should not be disabled for that reason, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, there was some. Go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, it's Caleb. You can actually pen the text. Speaking more generally about Ginkgo, you can pen the text at runtime with a reason why it's being skipped. And so there, if you're looking at all the tests themselves, rather than looking at a list of tests that are skipped with their reason, if you are generally editing tests or maintaining the code that is under test, you can see right there why this particular test is pending on Windows. And that might be helpful to keep the context of why the test is pending near the test itself, just for maintainability. That's a generally applicable solution for any test, regardless of whether they're conformance, unit, or end-to-end.
James had his hand up before I did.
Yeah, I need to follow up on what Patrick mentioned in the chat. Two problems. One is we haven't decided how to mark which tests will work on Windows in addition to Linux. So that was one. The other one is we do not skip tests which are marked conformance. So we can't print out saying, okay, we are skipping this only for Windows. So those are the two problems which we still don't have an answer to.
Well,
it actually just was the answer to both of those problems. You can use the existing mechanisms in our test suite today.
Okay, I mean, generally also tests that only run in a subset of situations we tag. And so if it is Linux only, we should probably tag it Linux. If it's Windows only, we should tag it Windows.
Right, but then you have to use the regex. It's actually more complicated than using I believe, than using the native functionality of Ginkgo to do this kind of pending work.
Okay, but
it clutters up the test description. It's less good, in my opinion.
Okay, well, yeah, and we should follow up on that. Can someone take note of that we need to resolve that issue? I think that is the biggest issue relevant to SIG testing, is how we want to identify those. So it's a way that's comprehensible to the release team or to people who ran the test and want to understand why they ran or didn't run. Okay, so I'm going to do a time check where it's 11:30 or half past, regardless of what time zone you're in. So are there any other key things people want to address before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I have one other key thing on it. The one thing that we actually didn't was my original question. Do we have anybody who needs to be an approver? Right now, I would suggest the approvers are the chairs of SIG Windows, which would be the typical flow. If we think other folks need to be in the reviewer state to help this along, but don't need to be there to approve it going to the implementable state, then we should probably communicate that. Otherwise, get a name in it and say, this person should also be along for the ride to make sure the I's are dotted. Maybe the checklist is enough complete or something like that. Otherwise, it would just end up falling to SIG Windows, and we by default say that's fine. I just want to make sure that we do dot the I and cross the T on that.
I mean, it seems to me like we need an approver from the key SIGs. I mean, each of those SIGs needs to approve, right?
I thought Michael had taken an action item to go get an approver from each of the SIGs that he listed.
Well,
He
I
said
didn't say
reviewer.
I didn't say approver. I said approver or reviewer. So we'll take this as an action item and figure out who can be an approver or reviewer. Not all SIGs are going to give us an approver, and it doesn't even make sense for us to every SIG to have an approver. For example, SIG testing might be a reviewer. SIG release might be a reviewer. But SIG node reviewer, maybe SIG architecture is one of the only ones that will be an approver.
Yeah,
So
I think,
we'll figure it out.
I think, in terms of rationale, some SIGs have been effectively on the project from the beginning, and they've gone through this process many times, right? So they may not need as much external help or guidance about what is expected. This is effectively the first time, I believe, that SIG Windows has gone through this process. So I think, it would be helpful for them to make sure that they get sign off from people who understand the expectations of the project as a whole. I'm happy to have my name on the approvers list. If you believe that would be helpful, whether we call it approver or reviewer, definitely the release team needs to be comfortable, regardless of whether it's alpha, beta, or GA, that they have a clear signal that it's ready for the release. So I would recommend an approver from the release team, and the others I would say at least review.
So just to make things a little bit simpler right now, since we're all here, Brian, would you like to be an approver as well as Aaron? If both of you guys would like to be an approvers from your two individual SIGs, we can make this simple, and then we'll find reviewers from the rest of the SIGs.
Yes, I'm willing to do that.
Okay, Aaron?
Sure.
All right, see, easy.
I would actually like to suggest that the other SIGs don't all have approvers. That's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
No, the other SIGs will go for
The other
reviewers.
SIGs go for reviewers unless you raise the issue of wanting to be an approver and are able to give a darn good reason. I wouldn't want to mix too many people in the loop on that.
But just to be clear, the role of an approver is to verify that the reviewers have, that sufficient review has happened. So by being an approver for a given SIG, what you're saying is our SIG, someone trusted by our SIG has reviewed it and is okay with it. That's all the approver is really doing.
Again, this is not really documented anywhere. I feel like we are trying to figure out what we want to call the role of approver and who we want that to be.
What I just said was written down before. I don't know if it's been rewritten since, but that was a fairly common understanding in the past and was written down.
I linked to the definition of approver for a CAP.
Yeah, it's in there. Approved is essentially implementable today. We changed the name and it was not consistent throughout the document in its language. Essentially, that's what happened, and Windows needs to get there by the end of the month. So we need people who can give bandwidth and can approve it, saying this is okay to move to implementable, which means the different criteria, like graduation criteria, which is entirely ill-defined, we need to be okay with. And that's it. So.
Graduation criteria, work with the reviewers and the approvers.
Perfect. I want to make sure SIG Windows has what they need to move forward, but Brian's time check probably needs to come in because I got the question answered I cared about. You got your reviewers.
I'm fine with us rambling because this is all related to the next topic that I put on there. So I posted I agree, I don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. I posted a suggestion for approving SIGs, Windows, Node, and Arch. Brian can be Arch. Michael's Windows. You can go find somebody from Node, and I'm happy to review as SIG testing. And I can find somebody from SIG release.
We'll work with you on that and figure it out. We'll chat offline, Aaron.
Okay. To go way back to where my hand was raised when we were talking about skipping tests and pending tests and disabling stuff, I don't know if any of that is actually documented anywhere, like what our consistent process is that we as a community should be following in this case. Quentin, would you like to take an action item to document what you proposed? So I feel like you're recalling some history of how we used to do things in the project, and we moved pretty fast back in the day. I don't know if we actually wrote how that was done.
So, sorry, are you referring to the testing now? Sorry, I missed the first part of your sentence.
Yes, when you said what we do is we write down why we're disabling a test. I get really finicky on the language of test versus job for one thing. So I really would appreciate it if you could write down what it is you were talking about so that the community knows how to do that if that's the process we're going to use. Because I feel
Sure,
like...
Sure. Just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that we do that today, right now, correctly. What I was suggesting is that that be a goal to avoid some of the goalpost moving stuff that we were speaking about earlier. But yeah, I can gladly put in an email to you, Aaron, if that helps. Cool.
Okay, I just feel like there was a lot of brainstorming about how we could disable tests, but I don't know of an existing process that we as a community use for that today. I was just trying to be clear on that. Okay, so we feel like we're good on Windows? Okay, so the thing I had in the agenda was to talk a little bit more about how we want to use KEPs. I've been a bit of a bull in a china shop in going around and trying to suggest that we should just use them now, even if we don't necessarily have a perfect process created or documented or automation around all of that. It's begging some questions, which I'm happy to iterate on, but I don't want to live in a world where I have to continually get collaboration and sign off from a trifecta of SIGs, being SIG PM, SIG release, and SIG architecture, because I kind of feel like that's what I have to do right now. So what I would like to suggest is that since KEP is largely about a process and it's largely about management of how we get the correct information written down in a single place, and it's all about the description of enhancements and what they are, and these are generally larger things, these all feel like things that product managers would be interested in, and that project and program managers probably have more experience in organizing than I do. I think that SIG architecture, y'all have a lot of opinions on the correct information that's supposed to be in these things, but I feel like we're super prone to bike shedding on process, and I'd rather find a process that is easier for a bunch of humans who are showing up and want to volunteer to help out from a management and shepherding perspective. So my proposal is to suggest that like SIG PM be the SIG that owns KEPs as a sub-project, and that SIG architecture just kind of be actively involved in reviewing KEPs. And I want you to be really actively involved up front in how we refine and define the KEP template and what we want approvers and reviewers to mean, and the process and all of that stuff. But to try and get the conversation to happen in SIG PM for the most part. I see.
So, sorry, I should have put my hand up there, but I guess this is Caleb again, I am, so my job is nominally program manager here at Google. I am as well a co-chair of SIG release and SIG PM. The work to consolidate the number of cooks in the kitchen on the KEPs, I mean, I've done a fair amount of work to have fewer opinions there. I have been trying to suggest that I have been working on codifying the feedback, not just about the KEP process, but about planning more generally in Kubernetes in the tooling, which is why I've tried to be very careful about adding new uses immediately for KEPs before the existing problems of format and automation are addressed, or at least addressable, that can be iterated on. I guess I do not know how the proposal to move the sub-project under which KEPs exist would make that job easier, or would accelerate the release of enhancements to the KEP process and the associated tooling. Given that all these things still would likely hit me in terms of addressing them, regardless of whether it's in SIG PM, SIG release, or here in SIG architecture.
Okay, so one of the things is to add to that came to my mind here, and it's a conversation we've been having of who owns the scope, and Brian is starting to try to document and get that worked out. But with the KEP process, if it were under SIG PM, SIG architecture owns the scope of the project, which is different from like any company where product management, or I guess that's project management, or product management owns it. Here, SIG architecture owns the scope of the project. And so how would they now be in the loop? Because that scope section that talks about what we're trying to do, and here's the use cases to say it's in and out. If SIG PM owned it, how would that then relate to SIG architecture in the process and ownership in that? That's just my open question.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Aaron that I think SIG architecture cares, and at least myself, I don't want to necessarily speak for everybody, but cares about the content of the KEPs, including the scope and technical content like APIs and designs and user experience and things like that. So definitely, I think SIG architecture should have input and contribute to the template, the KEP template. In terms of the process about how the whole project works and how it fits with the release process and how it meshes with the API review and things like that, I think getting some project management, program management folks involved in that is a great idea. Like if you look at the challenges that Windows had, I think a big part of it has been the lack of program management across the entire project. So, and the proposal makes sense to me, assuming that SIG PM is actually interested and engaged, and that's not going to stop me from continuing to try to make sure that the template captures what it needs to capture. For example, the graduation criteria section that currently exists is kind of mistitled, or all the content is wrong. One of those two things. But you know, so I would like to make sure that that gets fixed so that there isn't confusion in the future about that. So yeah, and it sort of has a bit ambiguous about who owns the KEP process. I think it would be fair to clarify that, or it would be useful to clarify that so that someone can move it forward and be responsible for it. So anyway.
So I guess I'm continually frustrated because this is nominally supposed to be me. And for those who do not work at Google, it has been a mighty struggle for me over the course of this year to get Google to fund me to work on this effort. So if you work at Google and if this is important to you, perhaps you could help me in that effort. But I have, you know, I did a bunch of work to reduce the number of cooks in the kitchen here, to only to find that I'm not funded to work on this. And so now we are here. And I would love to work on that original problem of getting this stuff implemented and useful to the various stakeholders in the project. And I would love, I guess, for ideas that address that problem.
So Caleb, just to broaden the question here for you for a moment, because you've been so intimately involved in this, and talking to people, and you're involved in SIG PM, SIG release, and you're obviously here and involved. Where would it be that would help get the people in engagement to get it more involved? Where's the best? Because I don't go to SIG PM, I don't go to SIG release, I don't have the time for those. Where is the best place within our organization that you think would help move it along, and why?
So I guess it relates to in terms of SIG release involvement, at least as this, this code, I've codified it, would be around the enhancements tracking process. The goal there would be to make that a forward-looking process that allows a more or less a tracking pull request versus a tracking issue to be created more or less automatically from the KEP content itself. So the KEP is a pointer, and everything else is a pointer to the KEP itself, rather than sprinkling the information in a bunch of different places. I have been working with, or I've tried to work with a few people who have stepped up or have raised their hands to pick up work in that specific domain in terms of enhancements tracking. I wrote what I hoped would be enough code to actually make that possible. I am still waiting for that PR to connect those two. The challenge is that you need to be spun up on how planning has worked today and not worked in order to understand what the concepts are in the tooling. Like the tooling is not particularly complex, but you do need the context for the project. And so until, unless I get that PR in the next week, which, I've been, I guess, increasing my deadline request to see forward progress based on the work that I have, foundation I've tried to lay. Then if that doesn't happen, then I, will be forced to finish that bit myself. So like I have, people who have been interested. It is turning that interest into code, so we can actually, we can iterate and have these conversations rather than hand waving. You can actually, propose a change, implement it, and see whether the desired effect is realized or not. In terms of helping me personally, it really is, at least from my standpoint, an internal drama between me and my employer to get the time and space to work on this stuff. It's been a real struggle, if I'm frank with everyone here.
So mea culpa, I have not collaborated with you internally within the walls of Google as much as I could have, as early as I could have on this process. But like I said up top, I feel like I'm being a bull in a china shop because I'm trying to drive us through the bumpy process of iteration here. Forecasting that there is something that can land that could help with the automation, we can sort of connect the dots there. But in the meantime, to echo what you're saying, like I would like to convert the nodding of heads that I keep seeing when I talk about like, let's do this to action. So Caleb, myself, and Stephen Augustus have probably been the three folks most actively involved in trying to push this ball forward, and each of us has tremendous experience in release and PM, and Caleb and I show up here at SIG Architecture quite a bit. So I feel like we have the right minds. I just want to kind of make the forum for a lot of discussion and issues and such going forward to be one place rather than repeating the same discussion 3 times in 3 different places. But it's nominally the same people in all of the places. It's just about trying to make sure the right stakeholders are involved. So I showed up at SIG PM and they were largely okay with this. There were a number of new people who showed up to SIG PM who are eager to help out. So my suggestion was to propose that like we try and continue the process of saying that design proposals are nominally going to turn into KEPs, and we should start to like fold that down. There's a lot of branching of effort that has to happen there, but I do feel like that's an effort that's easily charted out. And then with the little bit of time that we have left, to Brian's point that maybe the right content isn't in the KEP template now, and we do have it on our plate to kind of figure out what graduation criteria are. Phil Wetrock put together a PR for what do we want to update the KEP template to look like, so that even if we don't necessarily have the automation to help us support this, we could start to tell people like, when you are PRing all of the data we want to see in one file, this is what we think it should look like. And if we can nominally do that transition, then I can take the feature tracking issue and start to take some of the text that's in the description there and instead replace it with a link to the KEP.
And even more in terms of work that can begin now, I had to, unfortunately, again, do all of this work myself in terms of coding implementation. So there is a helper tooling today that can migrate KEPs from the existing template format to the proposed new format. Adding that logic into that would obviously help speed the overall delivery of the tooling itself. So modifying the template is great, but also connecting that into the process, the ongoing development process, is also very helpful. And I can comment on that PR as a pointer to do that as well, because diverging these things, obviously generates more work for someone, and it seems likely to be me. So obviously, as me, I am opposed to that. The generation of more work, obviously not delivering immediate value to the project.
So I do want to hear from Brian, but just to respond to that last point of trying to pile work on you, I in no way, shape, or form think that you are the sole person responsible for the implementation of this, and I'm trying to offer myself as somebody to help push this forward. And I think that Stephen Augustus has also been trying to help to push this forward. So I'm your guy inside the walls of Google, certainly one of them, if you need more bandwidth in that perspective. And I really do think, generally speaking, if I can't get my own employer to do something, the next place I look is this awesome community with a bunch of people volunteering to help. If I look at the fact that we had 100 and something people respond to the release shadows survey, there's not that room for that many people on the release team, but that sure sounds like a lot of people we could put to work on doing whatever painful manual cranking of gears that we have to move this forward. Now, Brian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, in terms of a strategy of moving it forward, as far as I can tell, there are two main issues. One is reducing the friction compared to the existing legacy design proposal process. So there are a couple of things that people have tripped up on, numbering being one of them. And the other one is confusing parts of the template, like the graduation criteria section. If we just eliminated those problems, then it seems like it would be no worse than the existing design proposal process, which has no template and no documented process or procedure and so on. And then the second thing is just communicating it to people that it's what we want them to do, and they can cargo cult the KEP process, even if they don't fully understand it, because that's what they were doing with the existing proposal process. And then we would at least be pivoting to something closer to what we want.
Yeah, and I've already sent out guidance a couple times to a couple people about dropping the KEP number. And the tooling, it's already been replaced by a UUID. Because, yeah, it's been a constant, needless stumbling block in actual implementation.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's done already, and that's what I guess what I'm saying is that I've been doing a lot of work listening to people, traveling around, and we are close. And so there are places to add, continue adding immediate value. Please sync up with me over any possible any communication channel if you are interested in doing that. I'm here working on this and working to onboard people onto this process.
I'm happy to help with that. I've been busy going around to all the SIGs along with my enhancements lead, but my goal was to start focusing on what code we have to see how that can help what we have. I pasted a link to the PR in the chat. I can send this PR to the SIG architecture mailing list if it would help. Caleb, you've been put on the PR as a requested reviewer. You've also been assigned it, I think, as an approver for this. And I would really like the rest of SIG architecture to take a look at this, because this is about filling out the KEP to maybe turn graduation criteria into a checklist and talk about upgrade, downgrade strategy, version, SKU strategy, things of that nature. I feel like these are a number of the things that Brian was talking about. I'm not looking for a full, complete enumeration, but I want to give enough guidance for people to start cargo culting. And I think maybe the next forum to talk about like the state of like KEPs and the code and automation that exists today would be the next SIG PM meeting. I forget if they're weekly or bi-weekly.
They're bi-weekly.
Okay. Anybody from, is the rest of SIG architecture, you guys cool with taking a look at this template? And Caleb, are you cool with us suggesting that we change the existing template that people look at when we tell them to write a new KEP?
Yeah, I'm totally cool with the changing of the template. If for the person who does change the template, all I'm want to do is stick up with them to get those changes into the conversion tool. So that's easier, not harder, to do this.
Okay. Quick question.
Edward, hi. I'm sorry I was late to introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Edward. I'm working in the contributor experience SIG, revamping the developer guide. And I want to show you something I've done. Let me share you the screen. Share screen. Oh, I can't share my screen. Okay.
Yeah, we're just about out of time as well.
Yeah.
But welcome
Yeah,
to.
my question is, I have a bunch of files that I think that files belongs to the SIG architecture. I just want to know, how can I find someone that I can be with to review and update those files? And or do you think it is a good idea to just file an issue and go that way? What do you think?
Just one second. If you could email SIG architecture with a list of the files in question, then we can try to pair you up with the right people. But there are definitely things like the API changes, the API conventions, the architecture roadmap, which actually I was in the process of creating a PR to move that are owned by SIG architecture. Yeah, so the link to the group was just posted to the chat. Yeah, so I would start with an email thread. GitHub notifications don't work super well for me. And a bunch of independent issues would be harder to discuss more holistically. So
okay, thank you.
Anyway, I have to run. It's 12 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thanks. If you've got something else, please add it to the agenda for next week. Have a wonderful week, y'all.
Thanks all.